Good day. Welcome to another edition of Conversations, a program brought to you by the Methodist Church in the British Virgin Islands. During this series, we are looking at Methodist heritage, and we have been speaking with our guests talking about the history of Methodism in the British Virgin Islands and how Methodism has impacted this community. Today, my guest is Sister Gracia Stevens, a retired educator and a local preacher within the Methodist Church. Teacher Gracia, welcome.
Thank you.
Now, it's a pleasure to have you here with us today, as I wanted us to zero in on one particular community to try to see how Methodism has impacted that community, what life has been like in that community, and that is the North Sound, where you are from. You are a steward at the North Sound Methodist Church. You taught at the North Sound School, which is now the Robinson O'Neill Memorial Primary. And you, I'm sure, have a great experience in North Sound as someone who lives there and can tell us a little bit more. And I want us to have that conversation about what Methodism meant and continues to mean for the North Sound community. Thank you for joining us today.
Okay, I'll do the best I can. I have read from history that the first North Sound Methodist Church was located at a place on the Bond called the Prayer House. It was a wooden chapel. I'm not sure why it was moved, but I have an idea because there were no motorable roads from Valley to North Sound. And so anybody who came directly to North Sound had to come by boat, which landed them at Gun Creek. So apparently, the members or the men and women of that day in the early 1900s probably wanted the church located in a place that was convenient for those who were coming, especially ministers, anyone from government, anyone who was coming to visit the church at that particular time.
So in essence then, what you would have had in North Sound was a wide community that was spread over quite a vast area. And it started in the hills all the way down to the seashore.
Yes, we do have a few small villages really spread out over the North Sound area. But for some reason, the church was carried down, the wooden building was carried right down to Gun Creek, which was pretty close to the dock.
So the church became, now, instead of a church on the hill, it became a church by the seaside.
By the seaside,
which
yes.
made it easier for the preachers when they came because everybody came by boat.
Yes, and the ministers who came only once a quarter.
Okay.
Yes.
So when they moved the church then from the Bond to Gun Creek, it meant now that the people who were up in the Bond now have a longer distance to travel to attend church.
Yes, they had a longer distance over a very rugged, rocky path. Not even a road, but a path. Yes.
So,
but still, they were willing to attend. And to my knowledge, as I grew, I never heard anyone fuss, but everyone was always early and bright for the Sunday morning worship, which was at 11 o'clock. Of course, the bell would peal at around 8 or 9 o'clock, and which made everybody to get ready on time for church.
So even up in the Bond, you would hear the bell that is ringing down in Gun Creek.
Yes, because of course there were no vehicles making any sounds, and on Sunday morning in particular, villages were very quiet. They respected the Lord's Day.
So the church was the only game in town.
Yes.
And on a Sunday
On a
morning,
Sunday
everybody
morning.
went to church.
Yes,
So
yes.
you then prepare yourself, and the bell would be a signal as to when to get ready.
Yes.
So that you are not late for church.
That's right.
So that's how you kept time. Because
Yes,
I assume
yes.
at that time not many people had clocks.
No, no. Well, the sun was the clock.
The sun was the clock. So it depends on the time of the year. You'll know where the sun is about
Yes,
what time it is.
and those older folk could look up at the sky and tell you exactly what time it was.
Okay.
Yes.
So, but then does that mean then that once the church was relocated from the Bond down to Gun Creek, as you're saying that persons didn't seem to think that there was a problem in terms of where the church was. They
No.
were just going.
Yes.
But it meant now that there must be some other things at play, because as a community now, people must now move in numbers.
Yes.
From one area to another area to attend church.
Yes.
And that was by a common consent.
It was. Yes.
Okay.
Yes. It
Because
was.
if they move a whole building, that means persons had to literally move that building.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Had to come
I'm not
together.
sure I know about whether they took it apart and,
Okay.
and brought it down, or how they got it down, but I know I've read where they did take it down to Gun Creek. Yes. Yes.
I think that is a very interesting point, because when we look at our churches in the British Virgin Islands, most of our churches are in locations where the original church was.
Yes.
There was no mass movement, as apart from maybe at Zion, where the church was first located on top of the hill, and then after being destroyed by several hurricanes, then it was decided that they would put it down in the valley because
Yes.
they didn't want to have to rebuild a new church. But in North Sound, it was a strategic decision
Yes.
to move the church from the Bond,
Yes.
relocate it to Gun Creek, where it was closer to the means of communication at that time, which
Yes.
was by sea.
Right. Right.
So, but how did that impact the community, if any?
Well, Sunday, the only place to go in those years was to church.
Okay.
So everybody went to church. Young, middle-aged, old, everybody went to church. Of course, the churches used to be bursting at the seams with persons. And when they went to church, as I said, there's a rugged terrain to get to the church. You would sometimes take your Sunday best shoes in your hands and you'd put them on under the old nut tree that was in the yard where people would congregate, those who got there very early, and they would talk over things, of the week and whatever, right there under the old nut tree, because sometimes that was the only day they were going to see certain people.
Okay, so that was a social interaction.
It was a social interaction before
Okay.
church. Yes.
So,
And then-
so the Sunday was not just a time to worship the Lord, it was a time to come together.
Yes, it was- yes.
To get up to date, update news
On
and
what
what
was
was
going
happening
on in the
with somebody
community.
else in the community.
Yes,
Because
yes,
then,
yes.
even though we might think that North Sound as being a small community, we are now understanding it was wide and
Yes.
and spread out. So
Right.
persons would not have interacted
exactly.
on a daily basis.
And then it was the only church
Okay.
in North Sound up until I think 1946 or 48, around that time when Church of God was built.
Okay.
Yes. And when they went to church now, they would have their Sunday worship, which used to be a long service,
Okay.
because they didn't look at the clock. They didn't have anything
Didn't
to
have
look
any
at.
so time didn't
And-
matter. Nobody was keeping time.
Nobody was keeping time. So the service used to run long. And then after service now, whether you were from the Bond, Baker's Bay, or wherever you were from, once you were at church, the people around the Gun Creek area would open their arms to you, and you would go to the neighbors' homes and you would have lunch, and that was practically every Sunday.
Now, that is interesting, because what we're saying is that here was a community spread over the hills.
Yes.
The church would move from the hills down into the valley. And now the people in the valley in Gun Creek now
Yes.
becomes the host.
Yes, yes.
So on a Sunday, when everyone comes to church,
Mm-hmm.
they're not going because church is at 11. The
Yes.
services go until 1 o'clock or
Or
thereafter.
after, yes.
And then after that, you go to a friend or a neighbor's house and you have lunch.
Or family.
A
Some of them
family.
were family, yes.
You have
yes.
lunch. You sit under the tree and you chat.
You chat until all o'clock.
5 o'clock when the sun cools.
Yes, but you had to make it up before dark because there
Okay.
was no electricity.
All right.
And then you had to get home before dark.
You know,
Yes.
because it's interesting because I never actually figured that that's exactly how it was. For me, reading accounts,
Yes.
they talk about the church, and one of the old ministers talk about being at the church, and it was a prayer meeting. And then after the prayer meeting, I literally sitting there and looking at the lights going up the hill.
Yes.
And it didn't make any sense to me then, but now it
Yes.
makes sense because now everybody has their lantern
Yes.
and they're walking home after prayer meeting.
A lantern or what you call a flambeau.
Or a flambeau.
Yes.
So he
yes.
can see the lights
Yes.
as they go
The
up,
movement.
back up the
Yes.
hill
Yes. Yes.
from down in Gun Creek.
And you know, even for the night service, a lot of people used to come back out to church. I don't think they used to have it on a Sunday evening, but they used to have it midweek.
Okay.
And people used to come out in the church, although it was dark and very rough to get there. People used to come out to church during the week. Mm-hmm.
So,
Yes.
so we are seeing then that the church being the only church in the community,
Yes.
the church being considered the center of the community, the center of life in the community, that the church also facilitated a level of interaction,
Yes.
a sort of camaraderie
Right.
among the members
Right.
and among the people in the community.
Yes.
Whether you are from the band or one of the other areas,
Right,
down
right.
to Gun Creek. You go to
Yes.
church on a Sunday and then you go by someone in the Gun Creek for lunch
Yes,
and
right.
a long chat.
Yeah, yes.
On that tree, a little snooze, and then you
Wherever.
go back home.
Yes. Yes.
So,
yes.
we're seeing then that through the church that a level of social interaction was facilitated,
Yes.
and which would have helped to build a stronger
A
community.
strong community.
Because then
yes.
people came together.
Right. And then, you know, the church was also used as the school.
Okay.
And at that time, the management of the schools was through the same Methodist ministers. Yes. So there's where the children went to school in this big one room building.
But there's an interesting stat for the school because historically there have been education, the schools are set up in the North Sound.
Yes.
But then sometimes because of certain instances they didn't continue. And then for a period of time, coming
Yes.
into the 1900s, there was no school in the North Sound.
There was
area.
none. There was none except for maybe one or two ladies or so I heard that I'm not sure where they got a little knowledge from, but they had school in their homes where they taught, you know, anybody who wanted to come. I don't know what the fee was, but it was a penny or two. But they came and they learned to read, they learned to write, and they learned to count. So they never said they learned arithmetic or maths. They learned to count.
And so that school, and as we know today, was started in the 1930s, and the first headmaster being Brigado Flax,
Yes.
whom the school in the valley has been named after.
The formal education began in 1935, and Mr. Brigado Flax was the first headmaster. It's called him in those days, headmaster. And a lady named Mrs. Inga Wheatley Clifton was his assistant.
Okay. Yeah. So we've been able to get a bird's eye view, a snapshot view of North Sound as a community.
Yes.
We see how the community came together, was held together, and even was facilitated in its growth and its development through education.
Yes.
Through the Methodist Church.
Sister
Gracia, yes. I think you have shared with us a bit about your community, a bit about Methodism and the impact of Methodism, and we were able to get an understanding of a part of BVI life that we would not even have known existed.
Yes.
Where persons would go to church, and church is an all-day affair because it's also the social interaction, and it
Yes.
isn't a potluck where everybody brings something, but
No.
then somebody host
Yes.
the other members
at
their
that
community.
time when they didn't have much.
When they didn't have much.
Yes.
So
yes.
whatever they had for lunch,
they
shared with you.
with somebody else.
Wow,
Yes.
that is fascinating.
Yes.
And I think that we lost that because then, as we wrap up, we would note now that the church did not
Yes.
stay in the band
in Gun Creek.
in Gun Creek,
No.
but then was relocated halfway.
Yes, and that was another story because some folks in Gun Creek wanted it to remain there, and the people of the bond declared that it was
It should
time
come back to
for
them.
it to come halfway.
Okay, so they were tired of going all the way down.
Yes, so
they-
that was a little battle in itself.
Okay. So there
but,
was a compromise, and
yes,
the church
yes.
came halfway
Yes,
down
so
the hill.
The bond people won the battle,
Okay.
and it was halfway, but that never stopped the people from Gun Creek
Okay, so
from
they
coming
came up
They came halfway, and
up.
the people from the bond met them halfway.
But now there's no need to go to anybody
to anybody's
for lunch.
home
Everybody
to
can go home.
get some lunch. No,
So
everybody
you
went
lost
home.
you,
We lost
you gained,
that
you lost that.
that kind of camaraderie.
Yeah, okay.
That was lost.
So you gain a new church site. You gain a position where everybody feels more comfortable in terms of being able to
Yes,
get there.
yes, yes.
But then you lose that
Yes,
interaction,
Right,
where
right,
after church persons would then meet together, have lunch together,
Yes.
and share their experiences.
I mean that sort of little coming together still exists. After
Okay.
church, you would find people congregating
They're
in
still-
the yard and chatting and so on. Up to
the
this
church after church.
church after church.
Okay, all right.
Yes,
Teacher Gracia, I really appreciate you sharing with us today on Conversation
Yes.
your experience in the North Sound community and what Methodism has done for that community in terms of its social development,
Yes.
in terms of education, and in terms of its spiritual development.
Yes.
I want to thank you, and I really appreciate your taking the time out to come and being with us today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. It was a pleasure.
I am Angel Smith, and I invite you to tune in again for another edition of Conversations.